The record producer was already packing up when Dean Martin walked in. "You get 30 seconds, he said dismissively. What happened next launched a legendary career and proved that sometimes all it takes is half a minute to change everything when you know exactly who you are and what you're meant to do. It was February 14th, 1949, and the offices of Capitol Records on North Vine Street in Hollywood were buzzing with the usual late-afternoon chaos of a major record label. Secretaries rushed between offices with contracts and demo recordings. Executives shouted into phones about distribution deals, and somewhere in the building, a recording session was running hours behind schedule. In the corner office on the third floor, A&R director Mike Curtis was having the worst day of his professional life. 3 scheduled recording artists had failed to show up, a major distribution deal had fallen through that morning, and he'd been listening to mediocre auditions for 6 straight hours without finding a single act worth signing. Curtis was 52 years old and had been in the music business since before most of his artists were born. He'd discovered singers who'd gone on to sell millions of records, and he'd also signed plenty who'd disappeared without a trace. But lately, it felt like the latter was happening more often than the former, and the pressure from Capitol's executives to find the next big thing was becoming unbearable. At 5:30 p.m., Curtis was stacking demo recordings into boxes, ready to head home to his family and a much-needed martini, when his secretary knocked on his door. "Mr. Curtis, there's one more person here for an audition, a singer named Dean Martin. He says he's been waiting since noon." Curtis didn't look up from his packing. "Tell him we're done for the day. Have him make an appointment for next week." "I already tried," his secretary replied. "He says this is his only chance to get to Los Angeles this month. He drove down from San Francisco specifically for this audition." Curtis paused, his hand hovering over a stack of rejected demos. He'd been that desperate young performer once, 25 years ago, driving across the country for a single opportunity that might change everything. But he'd also learned that desperation rarely translated into talent, and he was tired, frustrated, and ready to go home. "Fine," he said with an exhausted sigh. "Send him in, but tell him he gets 30 seconds. That's it. I don't have time for a full audition." Dean Martin walked into Curtis's office carrying a guitar case and wearing the kind of hopeful expression that the A&R director had seen on 1,000 faces over the years. Dean was 31 years old, but he looked younger, with dark hair slicked back and wearing his best suit, which was clearly several years old but well maintained. What Curtis saw was what he expected: another small-town singer with big dreams and probably limited talent, someone who'd heard about the record business from magazines and thought success was just a matter of showing up in Hollywood. What Curtis didn't see was the years of experience behind Dean's calm exterior, the hundreds of nights singing in small clubs across Ohio and Pennsylvania, the countless hours perfecting his phrasing, his timing, his ability to connect with audiences through nothing but his voice, the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he could do, even if nobody else had figured it out yet. "Mr. Martin," Curtis said without getting up from his desk, "I'm going to be straight with you. It's been a long day, and I'm not in the mood for a full audition. You've got 30 seconds to show me what you can do. No band, no orchestration, just you. Make it count." Dean nodded, unsurprised by the dismissive tone. He'd faced skeptical audiences before, club owners who'd hired him reluctantly, and crowds who'd initially ignored him. 30 seconds was actually more time than some people had given him. "I understand," Dean said, opening his guitar case with calm, unhurried movements. 30 seconds is plenty." Curtis returned to his paperwork, half listening as Dean tuned his guitar. The A&R director had heard this song and dance before. Nervous amateur singer, out-of-tune guitar, and a voice that would prove why they should stick to their day job. Dean strummed a few chords, testing the sound in the small office. The guitar was nothing special, an acoustic instrument he'd bought second-hand in Ohio, but his touch on the strings was confident and sure. Then Dean began to sing. The song was "That's Amore," but not the polished, orchestrated version that would later become his signature hit. This was the song stripped down to its essence. Just voice and guitar, raw and intimate, like hearing it performed around a campfire by someone who truly understood what the lyrics meant. Dean's voice filled the small office with a warmth that was both casual and sophisticated, both accessible and deeply professional. It was the sound of someone who could make a stadium full of strangers feel like they were his personal friends, but also someone who could break your heart with a ballad if he wanted to. But it wasn't just the voice that stopped Curtis in his tracks. It was the complete confidence, the utter lack of desperation or pleading that characterized most auditions. Dean wasn't performing for approval. He was sharing something beautiful because he knew it was beautiful, and he trusted that anyone with ears would recognize that. Curtis's pen stopped moving across the contract he'd been reviewing. His head came up slowly, his attention drawn by something he couldn't quite define but recognized immediately, the sound of a natural entertainer, someone who could make people stop whatever they were doing and listen. Dean's phrasing was unlike anything Curtis had heard in months of auditions. Where most singers tried to impress with vocal gymnastics or emotional manipulation, Dean simply told the story of the song with complete honesty and irresistible charm. Every word was clear, every note was exactly where it needed to be, and the whole performance felt effortless in the way that only comes from years of hard work and natural talent. 15 seconds in, Curtis had stopped pretending to work and was listening with full attention. 20 seconds in, he was mentally calculating how quickly he could get Dean into a proper recording studio. At exactly 30 seconds, Dean stopped singing and looked at Curtis expectantly, his guitar still ringing with the final chord. The office was completely silent for a moment that seemed to stretch much longer than it actually lasted. "That was 30 seconds, Dean said calmly, setting his guitar aside. "Thank you for your time." Curtis stared at him. "Don't move. Don't go anywhere. Sit down." Dean remained standing, uncertain whether he was about to be praised or dismissed. "In 30 years of doing this job," Curtis said slowly, "I have never heard anyone do more with 30 seconds than you just did. Where did you learn to sing like that?" "I didn't learn it anywhere specific," Dean replied honestly. "I just sang in clubs, listened to records, tried to figure out what made some singers special and others forgettable." "And what did you figure out?" Dean thought for a moment. "That the best singers don't perform songs, they have conversations with them, and they trust that if the song is good and they're honest about it, people will want to listen." Curtis leaned back in his chair, studying Dean's face. "Do you have more songs?" "Yes, sir." "How many more?" "As many as you want to hear." What followed was the most unusual audition in Capitol Records history. Instead of the standard 15-minute showcase, Curtis kept Dean in his office for 2 hours, asking him to perform song after song, testing his range, his versatility, his ability to interpret different styles and emotions. With each song, Curtis became more convinced that he was listening to something special. Dean could handle ballads that would make grown men cry, up-tempo numbers that made you want to dance, and novelty songs that were genuinely funny without being silly. But more than technical ability, Dean had something that couldn't be taught, the indefinable quality that made people want to keep listening. At 7:30 p.m., Curtis finally called his secretary, who had long since gone home, and left a message on her answering machine. "Cancel my appointments for tomorrow morning. I need to set up a recording session." He turned back to Dean, who had been patiently performing for over 2 hours without a single complaint. "Mr. Martin, I'm prepared to offer you a recording contract with Capitol Records, not a development deal, not a trial arrangement, a full contract with guaranteed studio time and promotional support." Dean's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his eyes suggested this was a moment he had been working toward for a very long time. "What kind of terms are we talking about?" Dean asked, proving that along with talent, he had the business sense to protect himself. "Better terms than I usually offer unknown singers," Curtis replied, "because you're not going to be unknown for very long." The contract negotiations took 3 days, but they were friendly negotiations between people who both wanted the same thing, to make great music that would reach as many people as possible. Dean's first recording session at Capitol was scheduled for the following month, and the songs he recorded during that session would become the foundation of a career that would span decades and influence countless other performers. But the real breakthrough had happened in those first 30 seconds in Curtis's office, when a tired A&R director had been reminded why he'd gotten into the music business in the first place: to find artists who could take a song and make it unforgettable. Years later, when Mike Curtis was asked about the best audition he'd ever heard, he would always tell the story of Dean Martin's 30-second performance. "Most singers use auditions to show you everything they can do," Curtis would explain. "Dean used 30 seconds to show me exactly who he was, and that was more than enough." The demo recording from that audition was preserved in Capitol's archives, and decades later, when music historians studied the development of American popular music, they would point to that 30-second clip as a perfect example of how natural talent, combined with years of experience and absolute confidence, could create magic in the smallest possible time frame. Dean Martin had walked into that office as a struggling singer from Ohio. He walked out as a Capitol Records artist with a guaranteed future. The transformation had taken exactly 30 seconds, which turned out to be all the time it took to recognize something truly special. If this story of seizing opportunity and the power of authentic talent inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with aspiring artists who need to know that sometimes all you need is 30 seconds to prove what you're capable of. Have you ever had a brief moment that changed everything in your life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the moments when talent met opportunity and changed everything.